Hello everyone, and welcome to Farming Simulator 25. In this video, I will have to survive on the island as usual. There is no money in our account, and we can't take any loans or use rented machinery. My main goal will be not just to survive, but to increase the amount of land, set up our own productions, and turn this small patch of earth into something wonderful in just 5 years. And whether I will manage to do it or not, we will find out right now. But first, subscribe to the channel and put a like. And now let's go to the island. We need to earn our first money. We have only a scythe and a pitchfork, so the only way to earn now is by selling grass. We will not waste time and immediately get to work. First of all, I decided to mow the grass around the selling point, so that I would not have to carry it far by hand. After that, I took the pitchfork in my hands and began collecting the grass, immediately going to sell it. In one trip, it was possible to earn only $56. The amount, of course, was very small, but at the moment it was the only option. Having sold all the previously mown grass, we managed to save up almost $400, which was already not bad. I decided to spend this money on tools that would allow us to earn faster. Since the capacity of the old pitchfork was too small, I sold it and bought a new one for 800 liters for only $26. The price was symbolic, but the benefit was tangible. Now we could collect and sell grass several times faster. We continued mowing because money would not earn itself. In the future, I plan to upgrade the mowing tool as well, because swinging the scythe is a tiring activity. This time, I decided to mow more grass so that it would definitely be enough for improvement. When there was already enough grass, I again took the pitchfork and began collecting it. In one trip with the new pitchfork, we were able to get already $223. This is several times more than with the previous ones. Collecting this territory went quite quickly, and on our balance there were now almost $2,000. With this money, it was already possible to buy something better than our scythe. I immediately ran to the store in search of a suitable option. My attention was attracted by a small lawnmower. With its help, we would not mow much faster, but definitely easier and with less effort. As expected, working with it became much easier. The lawnmower easily cut even tall grass, leaving behind a trail of forage. After a short time, I managed to mow even more grass and again started selling it. A little later, our income exceeded $4,000, and there was almost no grass left on the island. So as not to be left without a source of income, I decided to move on to cutting down trees. For this, a chainsaw was required, and fortunately we had enough money for it. In addition to the chainsaw, I also bought a small cart for $200. With its help, even large logs could be easily transported and calmly sold. Without wasting time, I took the cart and went to the forest. The palm trees on the island turned out to be quite massive, and I hoped to get a decent amount for them. I felled one of the palm trees, sawed it into pieces, and carefully loaded it into the cart. I managed to fit almost the whole palm except for the top. It turned out to be too bulky. I secured the logs with straps and went to the selling point. Going down the hill turned out to be easy, and very soon I was already at the receiving point. I removed the straps that held the logs and sold them, receiving almost $600. This was quite a good result, considering that the time spent was very little, but there still remained the top of the palm. Therefore, I returned, sawed it in half. All of it would not fit, loaded it into the cart, secured it, and again went to sell. For half of the top, we received almost as much as for the whole trunk. Selling wood turned out to be quite profitable, so I decided to continue doing this, gradually cutting down the forest. I worked the whole day, and when evening came, our balance turned out to be a little more than $13,000. We had earned quite well for the day, especially considering that at the very beginning we had exactly 0, and now already 13,000. and now we needed somewhere to spend the night since it would soon get dark, and working in the dark would be extremely inconvenient. In construction mode, I placed a tent, which cost us $57. In addition, I made a small path to it and leveled the ground around it. Now everything was ready to go rest. The next morning, I thought about buying our first piece of equipment. We had enough money now, and in order to earn even more, it was necessary to purchase at least a small tractor, with the help of which we would be able to do the work much faster. In the store, I chose a compact tractor of the New Holland brand. For the beginning, it should be enough. I also bought a trailer for transporting logs to speed up the process of moving the wood. All this together cost us a little more than $12,500, but I think we will be able to recoup this money fairly quickly, continuing to sell wood. We could begin the work. I sat in the tractor, attached the trailer to it, and went to the forest. Cutting down the first palm tree, I sawed it into larger parts, since now they easily fit into our new trailer. Driving up to the felled palm, I began loading. At one time, I managed to load quite a large palm completely. I carefully and securely fastened everything with straps and went to the selling point. Arriving at the place, I remembered that I had not removed the old wheelbarrow, which I had left here yesterday. I first had to move it out of the way. After that, I calmly drove onto the site, unfastened the straps, and sold the wood. For such a trailer, we were paid almost $3,000. Very good indeed. The income was gradually becoming higher and more stable. Returning back to the palms, I discovered that we still had one more top. Loading it onto the trailer, it turned out that it took up almost all the available space. I took it for sale, and for it, we were paid $2,500. Apparently, it was indeed a very large palm, since only for it we received a total of as much as $5,000. I decided to spend this money on some small production, so that in the future, by selling trees, we would also receive additional income from them. I settled on a compost pit. There was just enough money for its installation. In the future, we would be able to use compost for growing various vegetables and fruits, which would make our farm more productive and sustainable. There was not enough money to fully arrange the territory around the compost pit, but I was sure that very soon I would earn the missing amount and put everything in order. Without wasting time, I once again went to sell wood to replenish our balance. Gradually, I was cutting down the trees remaining on the island, and by selling them, I was earning the necessary funds. When I managed to save up a certain amount, I returned and finally arranged the territory around the compost pit. At last, the construction was completely finished. Now it was possible to move on to the next stage, filling it with all the necessary resources for compost production. The simplest and most accessible material for compost production turned out to be hay. We had more than enough grass on the island, so this was the best option. I decided to sell our old lawnmower and instead purchase a mounted one that would fit our tractor. Its cost was $4,000, but with its help we could work much faster. Slowly, I drove up to the mower with the tractor and carefully attached it. Now it was possible to start mowing the grass. The mower turned out to be quite wide, which made the work go at a good pace. When I had mown enough grass, it was time to process it into hay. And for this, a tedder was needed. However, we had no money left in the account, so I once again attached the log trailer and went to earn the missing amount. As a result, I managed to save up a little more than $10,000. This was quite enough to buy the necessary equipment. I left the trailer near the selling point and went to the store, where I bought a small tedder for $3,000. It also laid hay in a neat, single row, which greatly simplified further collection. With its help, I managed to process all the mown grass into hay fairly quickly, and this meant that now it could be collected and loaded into the compost pit. Collecting hay manually with pitchforks would take too long, so I went back to the store and for almost $4,000 bought a forage trailer. Now, thanks to this equipment, we could quickly collect hay directly into the trailer body and then transport it to the compost pit. There was still a lot of work ahead, so I immediately attached the trailer and began collecting hay. Gradually, the trailer began to fill up. When it was fully loaded, I took it to the compost pit. However, the trailer turned out to be lower than the pit itself, and it was impossible to unload the contents directly, so I dumped the hay next to the pit, and then by hand, using a pitchfork, threw it inside. When the compost pit was completely filled, I activated the compost production process. Now it remained to decide where to temporarily store the remaining hay, since rain was promised by the evening and I did not want it to get too wet. I began to look for a suitable place for shelter. In the end, I came across a haystack. One such stack held 10,000 litres and cost very little, so I placed it next to the compost pit to have a small reserve in case all the hay loaded into the pit was processed. Now it was possible to continue collecting. I sat in the tractor and first decided to transfer all the hay that remained near the compost pit into the installed stack. Dumping it there, I saw how it began to fill little by little. After that, I continued collecting the remaining hay all over the island. Having collected another full trailer, I again unloaded it into the storage. It was already clear that nothing else would fit in there, and at the same time there was still almost half of the hay left in the trailer. On the mowing site, there was still quite a lot as well. Therefore, I decided to collect all the remaining hay into one trailer and take it for sale, since we urgently needed money for developing the farm. As soon as all the hay on the plot was collected, I went to the selling point. Our trailer with wood was still standing there, so first I moved it and only then sold the hay. For it, I managed to get a little more than $2,000. After that, I decided to rest a little. The next morning, the first thing I did was check the condition of the compost pit. It turned out that already half of it was filled with ready compost. I decided to sell it, but for that, a suitable trailer was required. I ran to the store, sold the old cart which we had used for transporting wood at the very beginning, and bought an inexpensive but quite roomy trailer. It cost us $4,200. We had just enough money. I attached it to the tractor and headed to the compost pit to fill it. The capacity of the trailer was 2,500 litres. After the first sale, a little more than $8,000 was credited to our account. To be honest, I was surprised. This was quite a large sum, and we still had enough compost for 2 more such trailers. I immediately returned, filled the trailer again, and sold the remaining compost. As a result, our balance amounted to almost $22,000. The work turned out to be extremely profitable, and I decided to continue doing it in the future. Now it was time to refill the compost pit with new hay. I drove up to our stack to fill the trailer, but nothing happened. It turned out that I had installed the wrong type of stack, and it could not be used for loading. I had to sell it, and all the straw that was stored in it as well. For it, I received only $1,000, and now we had not a gram of reserve left. Therefore, it was necessary urgently to go and mow new grass. But before starting the work, I decided to build a small workshop. In it, I improved the characteristics of our tractor, strengthened the engine, installed new wheels, and added a front counterweight. For all this, I paid almost $2,000, but now the tractor had become noticeably more powerful. I got to work, and quite quickly mowed a large amount of grass. All that remained was to process it into hay. Attaching the necessary equipment, I went back to the field again. In about an hour, everything was ready, and I began collecting the hay. when the first trailer was fully loaded, it soon became clear that there was nowhere else to store hay. So I decided to expand the island territory and build a large hayloft. It was able to hold 150,000 litres. I think that would be enough for us. I unloaded it into the new stack, which this time was of the right type. Then I continued collecting. All the freed hay I began dumping into the new hayloft. When the work was completed, I returned to the compost pit and began filling it again. The compost production was launched again, but I did not wait for it to finish. Instead, I decided to continue cutting down and selling wood in order to earn even more money. After selling some logs, I purchased a winch. With its help, it was possible to pull trees and thereby speed up the process. I simply sawed a tree into pieces, hooked it with the cable, and dragged it to the selling point. The process sped up slightly, but I noticed that the length of the winch was enough to reach from the selling point all the way to the forest. Then I had an idea: to leave the tractor near the selling point, and with the help of the winch, pull trees directly from the forest. I tried, but instead of the tree, the tractor itself began to move. Then I put a large stone behind it so that it would rest against it. Everything worked. Now the tree was being pulled in and the tractor stayed in place. This turned out to be much faster than transporting the trees manually. Now all I needed was to cut down a tree, attach the cable, and the rest was done by itself. Thus, I continued pulling in trees with the help of the winch until evening. During this day, I managed to earn a little more than $26,000. At that point, I decided to finish the work and go rest. The next morning, I immediately ran to check how things were in our compost pit. It turned out that it was almost completely full. I attached the trailer and immediately began taking the compost out for sale. After selling the first batch, half of the contents, our balance increased to a little more than $42,000. Encouraged by this success, I decided to try building a small island to place another production facility on it. However, before I knew it, practically all our money had literally evaporated. Raising the level of land turned out to be an extremely expensive activity. Nevertheless, it was necessary, since there was less and less free space on the main island. We had about $6,000 left, and I decided to invest them in building another compost pit. After all, I had already seen that compost production brought an excellent profit, which meant the second pit would allow us to double our income. All that remained was to fill it with hay. I quickly managed to do this, and both facilities were fully ready for work. After that, I once again got busy harvesting and transporting wood. During the day, I managed to cut and sell quite a large number of logs. As a result, our balance increased by almost $20,000. I decided to invest this money in building a small vegetable garden on the newly created island. For growing vegetables, we needed gravel, fertilizer, and water. I immediately went to the store and bought 2,000 litres of everything necessary. I also purchased a bag lifting attachment so as not to have to carry everything manually to our garden beds. In order not to haul water every time, I activated the auto irrigation system. Of course, funds would be regularly withdrawn for it, but still, it was much more convenient and faster. Now, all that remained was to turn on the vegetable production. As soon as the water started coming in, it would launch automatically. In the meantime, I got busy selling compost that had already accumulated in our pits. I managed to earn a little more than $25,000 more. With this money, I decided to build a garden in which we would grow berries. It cost $17,000. However, because of the uneven terrain, I had to spend an additional $1,500 on leveling the plot. At the same time, I slightly improved our farm. I laid paths between the productions for more convenient movement. The garden was fully ready. All that remained was to pour compost into it and turn on the water supply. While I was busy with improvements, about 600 litres of compost had already accumulated. I immediately poured them into the garden. I think this should be enough until tomorrow, and during that time, even more would be produced. I remembered that we had very little hay left, and after the second compost pit appeared, it began to be used twice as fast. Looking into the storage, I found only 14,000 litres. This would be far too little. The reserves urgently needed to be replenished, but for now, I decided to rest. From the very morning, the first thing I did was check the state of our berry garden. It turned out that I had simply forgotten to turn on the production. After fixing this, I went to the garden beds. There, during my rest, quite a lot of pallets with various products had accumulated. I loaded into the trailer as much as would fit and headed to the selling point. As a result, for several pallets, we were paid a little more than $14,000. Quite a good amount, I must say. Also, during the time while I was resting, a sufficient amount of compost had been produced. I immediately transported it to our berry garden. After that, it was necessary once again to load compost into the compost pits. But in order not to do this manually with pitchforks, as before, I decided to build a small ramp. With its help, it would be possible to drive the trailer right above the compost pit and dump all its contents directly inside. This ramp cost us only $1,000, but it will save a huge amount of time in the future. Now, I sat in the tractor, attached our forage trailer, filled it with grass from the storage, and drove to the compost pit, where I calmly unloaded everything inside. Then I thought that we simply had to build at least a small shed for the equipment, since it had been standing in the open air for a long time. For $6,000, I set up a temporary shelter. For now, this should be enough. In the future, of course, we will build a full-fledged hangar, but even this option was much better than nothing. Our farm was gradually developing and becoming better and better, and that could not help but please. After all, now we had full-fledged productions that brought a stable income every day. Since all the main work for today had been completed, I decided not to waste time and continue selling wood. I worked the whole day and managed to almost completely cut down the remaining forest. Having sold the last tree, our balance amounted to a little more than $126,000. Simply a huge sum. I decided that it was worth spending part of these funds on the development and water supply of the farm. But upon returning, I saw that one box of frozen berries had been produced. I brought it to the selling point to see how much we could get for it. For one box, we were paid almost $3,000, and this was very good, considering that its production required a little compost and almost no labor. At that point, I decided to finish the day and went to rest. The next morning, our farm pleasantly surprised us. A huge amount of all kinds of products had been produced, and now it was necessary to sell all of it. Approaching the garden beds, I decided to turn on automatic selling. Yes, the profit from it is a little less than from manual selling, but it allows saving an enormous amount of time that we would otherwise spend on transporting and selling all the products. And as you understand, quite a lot had already accumulated. All the ready products, including boxes with berries and compost, I loaded into the trailer and took to the selling point. As a result, our balance increased and amounted to a little more than $191,000. Our farm was now bringing in quite a stable and good income. But despite this money was still not enough, since expanding and improving the island required much more serious investments. Therefore, I decided to spend the accumulated amount on purchasing a new tractor. Our old tractor was already barely coping with the tasks, and it was clearly lacking power. This time, I did not economize and bought a truly big and powerful tractor, which should serve us for a very long time. It cost us a little more than $70,000. Although the model was not new, it definitely had no shortage of power. The first thing I decided to do with the new tractor was to transport the remaining trees for sale, to clear the area for mowing grass. The new tractor easily pulled several logs at once, unlike the old one, which was not capable of this. Therefore, I coped with the task very quickly. Then it was time to replenish the hay reserves. Everything that we still had left I unloaded into the compost pit, after which I decided to sell the old equipment for hay harvesting and purchase new equipment suitable in size for our new tractor. The new equipment turned out to be very expensive, but it allowed us to significantly speed up the whole process. I spent as much as $76,000 on its purchase. When everything necessary was bought, I attached the new mower and began mowing. The new equipment handled the task many times faster, since both the tractor and the mower were now much more powerful and larger. Rather quickly, I managed to mow practically all the grass on the island. The next stage was turning the mown grass into hay. I started tedding, and in terms of time, this process took about as long as mowing. But in the end, we had really a lot of hay. All that remained was to gather it into windrows and transport it to storage. I also coped with this without particular difficulties. The work was not difficult, but extremely important. Now our storage was once again full of hay, which meant compost production could continue without interruptions. In quite a short time, I fully coped with the work. As a result, in our storage there turned out to be a little more than 80,000 litres of hay. This amount should be enough for us for a long time, at least until the grass grows again. Having finished with the preparation, I decided that it was time to invest the remaining money in the development of the farm, since there was less and less space on the island. New equipment needs to be stored somewhere, so I got busy with construction. I made a small extension and put up a large shelter on it, under which we will now place all our equipment. As a result, we got a spacious parking area with a shelter, and at the same time, I immediately provided for future expansion. For this, I began laying a road that passed right behind the hangar. This would give the opportunity to expand the farm without unnecessary rebuilding. All that was left was to move all the equipment under the shelter, and everything was ready. I also decided to sell the accumulated compost, and with the money earned, I built myself a small trailer where I would now live instead of a tent. Waking up early in the morning, I immediately went to do my usual tasks and continue the development of our farm on the island. The first thing I decided to check was the state of our productions, because it is exactly on them that further growth directly depends. My gaze immediately fell on the compost pit. Its storage turned out to be completely filled. This meant that it was time either to use the compost or to look for a possibility of selling it. Without wasting time, I headed to our garden to find out whether it required additional fertilization. But to my surprise, the garden's storage also turned out to be almost full. At that moment, I realized that the only correct decision would be the sale of surplus compost. Nevertheless, to be sure, I also looked at the garden beds to check their condition. Everything there was in order. Fertilizer supplies remained sufficient, and there was no need to hurry with adding more. Therefore, I returned to our tractor, attached the trailer, and loaded it to the top with compost. The road to the selling point, fortunately, was very short, and already in a few minutes, I delivered the first batch. For the full trailer, we were credited a little more than $7,500. Encouraged by such a result, I made a few more trips, and soon our balance grew almost to $60,000 for a simple product that we produce merely from ordinary hay. This turned out to be a very pleasant income. Having received such an impressive profit, I thought about expanding the farm and the decision to build new productions so that the income would increase steadily and with each day. However, at first it was required to expand the territory itself for construction. In construction mode, I formed a small islet and placed on it the first new production, a saltworks. For its work, only water is needed, which means the maintenance costs will be minimal and the profit with a competent approach quite tangible. To connect the salt production with the main territory, I laid a road to it, and literally in a few minutes, the new enterprise was completely ready for work. Now only one task remained: to provide it with water. But here a problem arose. Almost all the money had already been spent on construction, and there were no funds left for purchasing the necessary barrel. Fortunately, a solution was quickly found. Our garden had managed to produce several boxes with berries. I loaded them into the trailer and took them for sale. For them, we were paid a little more than $5,000, just enough to purchase the cheapest barrel. In the store, carefully studying the prices, I realized that the funds were enough, even for a more qualitative option. As a result, I purchased a small but quite reliable barrel for $6,000. Its main advantage was a built-in pump, allowing to independently pump water from any sources. This turned out to be a very successful investment, because now our new salt production can be launched in the shortest possible time. I immediately headed to the sea. After all, seawater is salty, which means it already contains salt that our new production can collect and process. Filling the barrel to the top, I went to the saltworks and unloaded all the water into the storage. Of course, it was filled only partially, but even that amount turned out to be enough to start the work. After that, I repeated the trip several times to supply the production with water and not let it stand idle. Gradually, the storage filled almost completely, and I decided that now it was worth waiting until money accumulated for the further development of the farm. I left the barrel and the tractor on the spot and decided to wait out a few months. My decision was also influenced by the fact that winter was approaching. To work at this time without a financial cushion would be too difficult. Half a year flew by, almost unnoticed. Our balance turned out to be almost $69,000, but that was far from everything. During this time, our productions also made products that could be sold and earn even more. First of all, I checked the compost pits. They were the closest. The situation there turned out not to be the most successful. The hay had run out. Therefore, it was not possible to fill them completely. I went further and was glad. The garden during this time had produced a huge number of boxes with berries. Their sale could provide us with significant income. In addition, the recently built saltworks had produced several pallets of salt. I decided first to restore the work of the productions so that they would not stand idle. We had enough funds in the account, so I sold the old small barrel and received almost $5,000 for it. In return, I purchased a more capacious barrel for 44,000 litres. It cost relatively inexpensively, but for its use, a truck was required. I had to buy the simplest option, which, as I hoped, would cope with the load. The whole set, barrel and truck, cost about $43,000. I sat behind the wheel of the truck, attached the new barrel, and went for water. Filling took almost half an hour. The volume was really huge. The hardest thing turned out to be to get out of the sandy shore. The front wheels of the truck slipped heavily, and sometimes even the entire front lifted up, but still I managed to cope, and further along the road it was much easier to drive. Although slipping still remained, I realized that in the future the truck would have to be replaced with a more powerful one. Reaching the saltworks, I unloaded the water, and the storage was filled completely. Now there was no need to worry about the operation of the production. I left the truck nearby and thought about transporting the finished products. For this, a trailer for pallets was required. I went to the store on our big tractor and found there a huge platform, ideally suitable for transporting all the products of the farm. The trailer cost $31,000 and we had just enough funds for its purchase. Attaching the platform to the tractor, I went to the saltworks to load the pallets. However, there it turned out that we simply had nothing to load them with. There was no money left, so I decided to quickly earn on the sale of compost. On the small tractor, I took one trailer and got almost $9,000. This amount should have been enough for the purchase of a small loader. I again went to the store and purchased a compact option, which cost a little more than $5,000. Already after the purchase, it became clear that its passability left much to be desired. I even had to push it manually to load it onto the platform. Nevertheless, I delivered it to the production and began loading the pallets of salt. When all the salt was on the trailer, I went to the selling point. The result greatly surprised me. For the entire batch, we received a little more than $170,000. It was a huge sum, and I was very pleased with such success. Inspired, I immediately went to the garden and loaded all the boxes with berries onto the platform. After selling the berries, our balance was replenished by about another $70,000. As a result, there was $151,000 in the account, an excellent result that allowed us to seriously think about expanding the territory. I returned to work and delivered hay to the compost pits so that they would begin production again. Then, in construction mode, I increased the area near the saltworks. This production had shown itself so profitable that I decided to build another one, laying a road to it and unloading the remaining water from our big barrel. I launched the second saltworks. Now our farm could bring even more income. Since quite a lot of money still remained in our account, I decided to take care of the improvement of the island. After all, a farm is not only productions and machinery, but also how convenient it is to work on it and pleasant to be on it. I started with our selling point. Here, I carefully leveled the ground so that trailers and trucks could easily drive up and turn around. Then I went to the store. Earlier, the machinery appeared there, right on an uneven site, which often interfered with work and even caused some problems during loading. Now I also carefully leveled the ground, and the area in front of the store became spacious and flat. Any purchase, be it a tractor, a trailer, or new equipment, would now appear on the prepared territory, where everything looks neat and well thought out. Special attention I decided to give to the place where we draw water. Before this, there was only a sandy shore, on which machinery slipped heavily. The wheels often got stuck, and every exit became a real challenge. Therefore, I carefully arranged a small entrance right to the sea, and poured the entire territory with concrete. Now here, it was possible to freely drive up, even with a heavy barrel, without fearing to get stuck in the sand. To make this place look not only practical, but also beautiful, I built a small wooden bridge. On it, one could calmly walk on foot, enjoying the view of the sea. From the water side, I put a strong fence so that no one accidentally stumbled and fell. The idea turned out very successful. Now this place looked like a real improved embankment. After this, I also thought about another part of the farm, the side where our haymaking was located. I also decided to fence, but with a simpler and cheaper wooden fence. It, of course, is not as strong as a metal one, but for protecting the territory, it was quite suitable. As a result, our island was transformed. It began to look more well-kept and solid, and working on it became many times more comfortable. We got a convenient entrance to the selling point and the store, a beautiful site for drawing water, and even a place for calm walks. Since there still remained enough funds on the balance, I decided to expand the farm and build another garden. In it, it was possible to grow other kinds of berries, which increased the assortment of our products, and accordingly, the profit. For its work, compost and water were required. Therefore, first of all, I started the truck and went for water. From the barrel, I had to unload everything that remained there. And then I again went to the sea and began to fill it completely. Further, I transferred to our small tractor and engaged in delivering compost. From the compost pits, I took out everything that had accumulated there and completely loaded the new production. When all the preparations were completed, I looked around and understood that the day had come to an end. Tired, I decided to go rest, because today we did very much for our farm. Our morning began with the fact that I sold all the accumulated compost. This brought us a good profit and freed the pits for a new batch. Immediately after the sale, I engaged in preparing fresh hay, which needed to be sent to the compost pits for further processing. When this was finished, I had a new thought: to build another salt production. But this time, I wanted it to be bigger and more powerful than the previous one. Fortunately, we still had funds in the account, so I began expanding the territory. I leveled the ground, prepared the site, and then invested $30,000 in the construction of the new salt works. It turned out almost twice as big as the previous one, and I placed great hopes on it. After the completion of construction, I, as before, began filling it with water. Gradually, the barrel emptied, and I had to go to the sea again for a new batch. Filling took some time, but soon the production started working at full strength. When both salt works were supplied with water and began to work steadily, I, for the first time, seriously thought about animal husbandry. The plan was to get pigs, because this direction could become very profitable. But immediately, a problem arose. To keep pigs, you need your own harvest to have something to feed them, and for the harvest, a field is necessary. On our island, almost no free space remained, so the only way out was to expand the territory. But such works required large investments. All the money that remained in the account, I invested in expanding the island. I made a convenient access road and began the construction of a new field. These works cost almost $90,000. The balance again rapidly decreased, and it became clear that without additional earnings, it would be very difficult to develop the farm. Therefore, I went to collect the boxes with berries, which had already managed to accumulate in the gardens. I began loading them onto the trailer, but when I reached the second garden, I suddenly realized that I had made a mistake. I had simply forgotten to turn on its production. The situation slightly upset me, because during all this time, it would have been possible to collect much more products. Nevertheless, I quickly corrected the oversight and turned on the work of the garden so that henceforth it would bring us stable income. I began to wait until boxes with berries would appear in this production. And while we do this, it was worth replenishing hay, since the previous stocks were gradually ending for us. So I sat in our big tractor, and with the help of the mower, mowed all the grass that there is on the island. After that, I tedded it and gathered the rows. I decided to slow down a little and wait until in our new garden, the first boxes with berries would appear. But simply sitting idle was not desirable, because there were always other chores around the farm. In addition, the stocks of hay that we still had in the storage were gradually coming to an end, and without it, the compost pit could not work. That meant it was necessary urgently to replenish the reserves. When all the grass had been transported, I began unloading it into the storage. Gradually, the warehouse was filling up, and at some point there simply was no space left. Then I decided to build another exactly the same warehouse, so that the hay would not be wasted in vain. I finished the work already closer to the evening. Both warehouses were full, and in my soul there was a feeling of tiredness, but also of satisfaction from the work done. After this, I went to rest. The next day, I was woken up by the knock of rain on the roof. Going outside, I saw the grey sky and dense clouds. To work in such conditions was pointless. The machinery would get stuck, and the efficiency of the work would be minimal. Therefore, I only briefly inspected our productions, made sure that they continued functioning, and returned to the house. The rainy weather lingered for a long time, and I had to wait several months until the season of continuous downpours ended. When finally the sun appeared, I once again set to work. The first thing I did was check the balance and was pleasantly surprised. In the account, there turned out to be almost $45,000. In addition, during this time, our productions had made a considerable amount of products, which urgently needed to be sold. I remembered the past difficulties with our old loader and realized that it was impossible to delay further. Therefore, I went to the store and exchanged the old loader for a new one, much more powerful. It cost us $35,000, but this investment promised to fully justify itself. Immediately after the purchase, I headed to the Salt Productions and began loading the pallets. The new loader coped with the task many times better. The pallets were lifted easily, and the work went quickly and without delays. As soon as all the salt was loaded, I went to our gardens and manually began loading the boxes with berries onto the platform. When everything was ready, I secured the cargo and went to the selling point. The result pleased me. It was possible to earn $184,000. This was a huge sum which opened new opportunities for the development of the farm. After this, I looked into the compost pits. The storages really turned out to be full, so I took the small tractor and began transporting compost into the productions where berries were grown. I managed to distribute the contents evenly. Half went into the first production and the remaining part into the second. But with that, the compost in the pits ended. To resume the process, it was necessary again to prepare hay and load it into the storages for fermentation. When this was finished, I returned to my long-standing idea, the construction of the first field. We now had enough money to allocate a plot for it. It took a little more than $130,000. When the territory was prepared and leveled, it was time to engage in the cultivation of the soil. For this, new machinery was required. A cultivator. In the store, I chose an inexpensive but reliable model. It cost almost $18,000 and was mounted, which greatly simplified turns even on small plots of land. This was exactly what we needed. I started the tractor, went to the store, and immediately took it to our new field. The work of ploughing went quite quickly since the area was still small, but the result was impressive. Now we had a full-fledged territory, completely ready for sowing crops. This became an important step in the development of our farm and opened new prospects for the future. Now the time had come to engage in sowing. I decided to plant corn since the price for it was quite profitable. Therefore, I went to the store and began choosing a seeder. My attention was attracted by a model costing almost $24,000. It was quite large and could be used not only for corn, but also for other crops. Additionally, I purchased one bag of seeds, after which I attached the seeder and went to the field. On the spot, I carefully set it up and began the work. It was necessary to sow carefully so as not to sink the tractor. Soon, the entire field turned out to be sown, and all that remained was to wait until the corn ripened. Our farm was gradually developing and becoming better and more efficient. While waiting for the harvest, I decided to take care of the productions. First of all, I bought more seeds and fertilizers for the garden beds. Then I attached the trailer, poured into it all the necessary materials, and took them to the storages. With the help of the new loader, I unloaded the seeds and fertilizers, but I did not manage to finish everything in one day. Therefore, I decided to rest and continue the work already tomorrow. The next day began with the fact that I continued pouring the seeds we had bought into the storage. When the work was finished, I did not take the platform back under the shed, but decided to drive to our salt productions and transport the finished products. The sale brought us a little more than $200,000. An excellent result, because it is exactly such productions that make it possible to earn money for the further expansion of the island. After this, I went to see how things were with the corn. It turned out that the sprouts had already emerged, and gradually the crop was becoming higher and stronger. Since we now had new funds, I decided to take care of the improvement of the island. At first, I wanted simply to replace all the roads with concrete ones, but then the thought came to build a small pier around the island, made of concrete. It looked neat and beautiful. I also slightly redid the driveways to the productions so that working with them would be even more convenient. I completely fenced our haymaking area and, of course, provided a convenient entrance. During the planning, I even had to create another small islet and move the compost pits onto it, since their former location interfered with driving around the farm. When the new territory was prepared, all that remained was to transport all the compost that had accumulated. Since the storages of the gardens were already filled, I decided to sell the produced compost. I sat on the small tractor, loaded the trailer, and headed to the selling point. There, by the way, stood our other tractor, so at first I had to drive it away and only then begin unloading. After this, I repeated the trip several times until all the compost had been sold. As a result, in our balance, there turned out to be almost $181,000. Quite good. Now it was possible to confidently sell the old compost pits and build new ones. I decided not to be petty and to erect immediately 3 modern pits. But for this, it was necessary to slightly expand the island. I engaged in this, after which I built a convenient ramp for loading and unloading, as well as laid out paths. Now everything was ready for further work. Now nothing prevented laying a road through the farm. So first I slightly leveled the ground and then poured it with concrete. For the passage, the haylofts interfered a little, but we will move them a little later. Right now, the main thing was to fill the new compost pits with hay so that the fermentation process would begin and the production of compost would start again. I started our big tractor, attached the forage trailer, and went for hay. In one of the storages, the reserves ended, so it was necessary to use another one. Gradually, all the pits were filled, and the work went on its way. Today, we really did a lot. The farm noticeably changed and began to look much better. But since it had already grown dark, I decided that it was time to rest and continue the work on the next day. In the morning, I decided to deal with moving the hay storages because they greatly interfered with driving around the farm. At first, I thought simply to move them farther away from the road, but later, I understood that it would be much more convenient to place them next to the compost pits. This way, the loading process would take less time and we would not have to carry hay too far. Having thought through the further steps, I immediately started work in construction mode. First, I expanded the territory of the island near the compost pits, and then built 2 new storages. When everything was ready, it looked quite attractive. Now it only remained to transport the hay from the old storages into the new ones. I went to the tractor, attached the forage trailer, and since it was not fully loaded, I filled it up to the top with hay. After this, I went to the new storages. I had made enough space so that it was possible to turn around ground calmly. Therefore, the unloading went without problems. The transportation took quite a lot of time, and only by noon, one of the new storages was completely filled. The second one, however, remained half empty, and more fresh bales could still be brought there. While I was working, I noticed that at our salt factory enough products had accumulated. I hurried to transport it for sale. I carefully loaded the pallets with the loader and went to the selling point. On the way, I decided to drop by the garden. There also several boxes with berries had gathered. I manually loaded them onto the trailer and took them along with the salt. As a result, having sold all the products, I earned a little more than 360,000 euros. This was simply magnificent. Such an amount was quite enough to further expand the territory of the island and build new productions. Having finished the matters, I returned the trailer to its place, sold the old storages, and leveled the plot under them, because it was exactly there that I planned to lay a new road. Thinking a little longer, I decided to move our salt production as well. I did not like at all that it was located too close to the compost pits. It looked not very good. Therefore, I got down to work. First, I drove the truck closer to the selling point so that it would not interfere with our work, and then I parked the loader nearby. After this, it was possible to begin the rebuilding. I completely removed the old island because I planned to place the new productions farther away from the main territory. When the former site was underwater, I built a new island with compost pits and began laying the road. I purposely led it as far as possible from the farm, so that in the future there would remain a possibility to expand the islands. During construction, I observed with surprise how quickly the money was melting. Recently, we had 500,000 in our account, and by the end of the works, less than 150,000 remained. On the new island, I built 2 large salt productions. Now they occupied less space, while the output of products remained the same. After this, I increased the island a little more and made a shed for the loader. Now the territory looked neat and convenient, and if necessary, it could be easily expanded. Then I dealt with the machinery. First, I transported the loader, then the truck, but simply putting it was not enough. It was necessary to launch the new productions immediately. I unloaded all the water that was in the cistern, but even that turned out to be not enough for one enterprise. I had to go for a new portion. Filling the barrel, I returned and supplied both productions with water. After that, I started the process of water processing. However, for full-fledged work, even more was required, so I again went for water. The transportation took a lot of time because the barrel was filling slowly. Fortunately, soon all the storages were filled to the top, and now it was possible not to worry that the production would stop in the near future. Putting the truck in place, I looked over the renewed territory. Everything looked beautiful and neat, and most importantly, we had much more space for the further development of the farm. Waking up early in the morning, I was pleasantly surprised. Now our farm looks quite good. We have several productions that bring stable income, and quite recently, we managed to build the first field. By the way, it is necessary to see how things are with our corn. It is already quite big, which means it will soon fully ripen. We will have to prepare for its harvest, but we will take care of that a little later. Right now, I decided to go for a walk and check how things were going at our productions. Everything there turned out to be completely in order. The reserves in the storages were full. Therefore, I understood that it was worth engaging in something else. Around our island, there were still many small islets on which only trees grew. This means that we can cut them down and sell them. However, the main problem lies in the fact that the distance between the islands is quite large, and building a good road would take too much money. But I knew how to solve this problem much cheaper. However, even the money that was in our account was not enough. Therefore, I engaged in selling the products that had accumulated in the storages of our productions. Our compost pits were just overflowing, and they needed to be emptied emptied. In order not to transport all this compost with the small tractor, I decided to purchase a bigger trailer and to perform the work with the big tractor so that everything would go faster. Arriving at the store, I began choosing a trailer. I liked an excellent option for almost $14,000. I think it will be a good solution for our task. Attaching it to the tractor, I headed to the compost pits and began loading. Into our new trailer went as many as 20,000 liters, and I managed to completely empty 2 compost pits at once. Selling all this compost, I earned $63,000. This was really not bad because we still had a reserve in the 3rd pit. Loading it as well, I took it for sale and received additionally almost $32,000. Since all the compost had been sold, it was necessary to fill the pits with hay again so that a new processing cycle would begin. When the work was done and all the pits turned out to be loaded, I moved into the small tractor and drove the boxes with berries produced in our gardens. The sale brought about $16,000 more. Putting the tractor in place, I remembered that our hay was running out, and without it, the production of compost is impossible. Therefore, I engaged in harvesting. First, I mowed the grass, removing the extra equipment from the passage, and then I began the work. By afternoon, I was already finishing transporting the ready hay to the storages. I managed to fill them almost completely. When the forage trailer was put in place, I had the idea to build a few more salt productions. This would allow earning several times more than now, but for this large investments were required because it was necessary to expand the territory. I tried to do everything as cheaply as possible, but still I spent $60,000 only on enlarging the plot. This was enough only for placing 2 more productions, but I think this is quite sufficient. After all the expenses in our account, there remained a little more than $20,000. Now, it was necessary to fill the new productions with water. I sat in the truck and went to the water intake place. Carefully driving in, I began filling the barrel. This turned out not to be a quick matter. It was necessary to wait until it filled completely. Driving out was difficult. The truck slipped with all the wheels, but still managed. For the future, I understood that we should purchase a more powerful truck. Reaching the productions, I carefully turned around, drove closer, and unloaded the water. Then I again went for a new batch. As a result, both new productions were completely supplied with water. After this, I put the truck in place and went to rest. Outside, it was already getting dark. The next morning, I again went to see how things were on our cornfield, and then looked into the compost pits. There, it was already necessary to add hay, but first, I decided to check the salt production. Everything there was going excellently. The process had gained momentum, and the first pallets had already appeared. Since we had a little money on the balance, I decided to sell the salt immediately. I attached the platform, loaded the pallets with the loader, and took them for sale. At the same time, I went to the gardens to take the boxes with berries. As a result, having sold all the products, we earned almost $50,000. After this, I put the platform in place and began thinking what would be the best way to reduce expenses for building the road to the island. In the end, I made the decision to build an inexpensive wooden bridge from separate small sections. They had to be held on small supports made from an embankment of soil. Such a variant greatly reduced the cost of construction because for one section, we paid only $1,000. In the end, for building the entire road to the nearest islet, we spent $45,000. This is significantly less than if we had filled the entire path only with soil. A very long bridge between the shores turned out, but there was also one minus. Heavy machinery it would not withstand. Therefore, transporting logs to our farm would have to be organized in another way. For now, we did not have money for this, and so as not to waste time in vain, I decided to sit on our small tractor, attach a winch to it, and head to the other island to begin cutting down trees, then only to transport transport them to the farm would remain. I began felling the palms one after another, and already in 1 hour, not a single standing palm remained on the island. Since nothing else useful we could do for now, I returned back to the farm, put the tractor in place, and decided to rest. In the morning, the first thing I did was run to our salt productions, hoping that pallets had appeared there. To my joy, each of the productions already had 1 pallet in the storage. I did not delay and immediately went for the tractor to transport them for sale. Driving up to the storage, I moved into the loader and began loading the pallets. As soon as the work was finished, I headed to our gardens to also take the boxes with berries. Having sold everything, I noticed that our balance increased by $75,000. I was very glad about this, but to be sure that the money would be enough, I decided to sell also some other products. After this, our account amounted to a little more than $235,000. Leaving the tractor in place, I hurried to the store. There, I found a huge crane. It cost $140,000 and was unusual. Its cables could be used as a cableway. They were just enough to secure on the small island with trees. Sitting behind the wheel of the crane, I headed in the direction of our bridge. When I arrived, it became clear that it was necessary to prepare a small area where we could secure the support. Everything was ready, and I began unfolding the crane. One support I installed on the island with trees, and the crane itself stood on the farm. In the end, we had a real cableway between the islands, along which we could transport logs. I immediately decided to test it and was pleasantly surprised. Everything worked just perfectly. We could already transport the trees to our island, but now a new task arose: how to deliver them from the crane to different places across the territory. For this, I decided to take our truck and purchase for it a trailer for logs. Onto it, it would be possible to load all the transported wood. It cost us almost $30,000, but I am sure that we will quickly recoup these expenses. Driving closer under the hook of the crane, I carefully loaded the first tree onto the trailer, after which I continued the work. When the trailer was completely filled, I transported it to a place where it did not disturb anyone. I left the wood there, since I did not want to sell it raw. It is much more profitable to process it into a more expensive material. But for now, we did not have money for a new production, so it was necessary to wait and save funds. Therefore, I decided to go rest. The next morning, I saw that the corn which we had planted earlier had already ripened. That meant it needed urgently to be harvested. But before this, I first looked in at our salt productions. New pallets had just appeared there, but I decided to deal with them only after we harvested the crop. First of all, we needed to acquire machinery for harvesting corn. In the store, I chose a small combine of the brand John Deere. Its size was quite sufficient for our field. For it, I also purchased a corn header. Altogether, it cost $23,000. Without delay, I sat in the combine, attached the header, and headed to the field. I immediately began harvesting the crop. For convenience, I started by collecting the corn along the edges of the field so that later it would be easier to turn around. Already after the first pass, the bunker of the combine turned out to be full. It was time to unload the grain. I ran to our small tractor, attached a small trailer to it, and in reverse drove up to the combine. The corn began unloading. As soon as the bunker was completely emptied, I continued harvesting. Gradually, the corn on the field became less and less. When the trailer was completely filled, I decided to immediately sell the harvested crop. At the selling point for one trailer, we received a little more than $6,000. Quite good. When the corn on the field was finished, I unloaded the last remains into the trailer and also took them for sale. As a result, From this small field, we earned $17,000, a very good result considering its size. After harvesting, I decided to rest for a few months in order to save more money. Already in April, our productions managed to deliver products that could be sold to earn funds for building enterprises processing wood. I took care of the farm and filled all the productions to the maximum. Then I began selling the accumulated products. As a result, our balance amounted to a little more than $823,000. This sum pleasantly surprised me. Now it was possible to confidently begin the construction of new productions. First of all, I built a wood chipper, which processes logs into chips. It cost $27,500. For us, this was not too big a sum. After this, I built a power plant, which allows processing chips already into electricity. This we can sell and receive very good money for it. When everything was ready, I sat in the truck and transported the prepared logs. Loading them into the chipper, I activated the production and continued bringing wood from the island to the farm in order to load the entire stock. After some time, the last trailer with logs was already approaching the chipper. Altogether, we managed to transport more than 400,000 liters of wood, which immediately began processing into chips. Then I took the truck back to its place, moved into the tractor, and headed to the productions, because it was necessary to take the chips to the power plant. Unloading the first trailer, I launched the electricity production. Now it only remained to make sure that the station did not stand idle without raw material, and to add chips on time. After this, I finally decided to build another hangar for our machinery. The old one could no longer cope. The machines simply did not fit. Therefore, I chose a huge hangar so that all our machinery would fit there. It cost us almost $100,000, but it was an extremely necessary purchase. I immediately began transporting machinery into the new building. Gradually, the hangar filled up, and already, after some time, there was almost no free space left in it. Since today we had already done very much work, I decided to go rest. The next day, I decided to deal with our field, but first I bought a more maneuverable tractor, which was supposed to cope with the work much faster. It cost us almost $300,000, but I consider this a worthy purchase. First of all, it was necessary to cultivate the field. Therefore, I went for a cultivator. However, when I was already returning with it, I noticed that on bumps the front of the tractor bounced strongly. Therefore, I went to the store and purchased a counterweight. At first, I thought that 900 kilograms would be sufficient, but when I tried, I understood that it was not enough. And then I took already 1,500 kilograms. Now everything was excellent, and I began the cultivation. After this, I sowed the field with soybeans. At this, the work on the field was completed. Then I again poured chips into the power plant and thought that it was time to wash our machinery. It had already worked very much and was very dirty. I bought a washing station and went to wash the machines. As a result, almost all the machinery looked like new, which made me very glad. Our farm was becoming more and more beautiful, and the ways of earning were becoming more and more numerous, and each of them was bringing us more and more money. The only thing that embarrassed me, we still did not have our own house. The old trailer in which we had lived all this time, it was already long time to sell and build something better. Therefore, for $135,000, I built myself a big house almost in the center of the island. After this, I engaged in the improvement of the territory around it. Leveling the ground also took quite a large sum. I had to remove part of the fence in order to raise the soil level in some places. When the entire territory was leveled, I made a convenient entrance directly to the house. Then I planted lawn and flowers, and next to the house, I built a garage. Possibly in the future, we will acquire ourselves a personal car. summer. On the plot, I also planted several trees, which added coziness and atmosphere to our farm. As a result, we got a very beautiful and, at the same time, profitable farm on the island in the middle of the sea. Upon waking up in the morning, the first thing I decided to do was check on all our productions. Our farm had grown significantly recently, and now we truly had a lot to manage. So, without wasting any time, I set off to work. First, I decided to see if the recently planted soybeans had sprouted. To my delight, the first shoots were already emerging from the soil, an excellent sign that immediately lifted my spirits. After that, I headed to the compost pits. They were completely full, which meant I urgently needed to empty them to keep the fermentation process going. I didn't delay and got straight to work. After filling the trailer with ready compost, I took it to sell and earned a little over $50,000. Since there was still plenty of compost left, I returned for the next batch. The balance had noticeably grown, which pleased me. Next, I loaded fresh straw into the pits to continue the processing and took the leftover back to the warehouse. After that, I checked the salt production. Quite a few pallets of finished products had accumulated, and I knew that selling them would bring good income, so I hurried to get the transport equipment. This time, I chose a more modern tractor. It would allow me to handle the delivery faster. Placing the trailer next to the production site, I switched to the loader and carefully loaded all the pallets. Once everything was ready, I secured the cargo with straps and headed to the sales point. The road was narrow, requiring all my driving skills, especially when reversing. The sale brought in about $650,000, a sum that greatly boosted my mood and inspired me to continue working. After that, it was necessary to refill the reservoirs with water to keep production running. But the old truck, to which the water tank was attached, was now used for transporting logs. So I decided to buy a new one. At the store, I chose one of the most powerful trucks and equipped it fully. It cost about $66,000, but the purchase was completely worth it. Now, we could transport more water, which the old truck barely managed. Sitting behind the wheel of the new vehicle, I headed to the tank. It contained about 25,000 litres of water, enough to fully supply one of the production sites. Then I went for a new batch of water. The driving experience was amazing. The power was felt in every gear, and the comfort was top-notch. Returning with a full tank, I refilled all the production sites, returned the equipment to its place, and continued working. Now it was time to sell the boxes of berries produced in our orchards. Carefully loading them onto the platform, I prepared for the next delivery run. After finishing with the first plantation, I moved to another and carefully loaded its harvest as well. I took the fully loaded trailer to the sales point. For such a large quantity of berries, I received almost $160,000, a fantastic amount, especially since our balance was now nearly $1 million. After a bit of thought, I decided it was time to invest this money into developing the farm so it could generate even more profit and continue to grow. My next goal was to build a sawmill. With it, we could produce wooden items, for example, boats or even yachts. However, there was very little free space left on the island, so I first decided to expand its territory. After preparing the site for construction, I erected the sawmill there. It cost around $100,000, but I was confident it would pay off quickly. When the construction was completed, a new problem arose: where to get wood for production. The solution was simple. I built a bridge to a neighboring island where many trees grew. Once all the construction work was finished, I finally decided to take a break. The sun was already setting, and the evening twilight descended over the island. The next morning, I started by getting on our small tractor, attaching a winch, and heading to the new island with the trees. First, I needed to clear the area to set up a crane support. Once the site was prepared, I returned to the farm, switched to the crane, and directed the boom toward the island. island. After installing the cable support, I went back to the island and began harvesting the trees to transport them to the farm. Using the tractor, I dragged several felled trunks to the spot where the crane could grab them. Then I carefully moved the trees to our main island and immediately loaded them onto the truck. I worked on this for several hours until the truck's trailer was completely full. After that, I headed to the new sawmill, carefully drove under the canopy, and unloaded everything into the warehouse. Now we had enough wood to start producing planks and beams. I planned to use these materials in the new production, making boats. However, first, I needed to prepare the site where the workshop would be placed. Once the area was ready, I installed the production facility. It cost us a little over $115,000. After slightly expanding the surrounding area, I finished all the work. Now we could produce our own yachts and other watercraft. To start, I needed to load the necessary materials, the very ones currently being produced at the sawmill. I rushed to check on the process. It turned out that while construction had been ongoing, the wood was almost gone, but all the required planks and beams had been produced. I decided to first transport the finished materials to the new production site and then handle loading the fresh wood. But first, I had to move the truck. I parked it near the crane and then headed to the tractor. At that moment, I remembered that there was no equipment at the sawmill to load the pallets, so I went to the store and bought a loader. After placing it on the platform, I headed to the sawmill. Once there, I unloaded the machine and got to work. When all the planks and beams were carefully stacked on the platform, all that remained was to deliver them to the new production site. Upon arrival, I secured the load with straps, and the materials were moved into the storage. Now everything was ready for the launch. We could start producing the first yacht. I hoped its sale would bring good profit to our farm, but we'll find that out later. For now, I needed to load a new batch of wood. I left the tractor with the platform in place and hurried back to work. By the end of the day, I managed to fill another trailer with logs. I transported it to the sawmill and carefully unloaded it. The sun was already setting, so I decided to finish work and go rest. The next morning, I thought it was time to get a vehicle for quickly moving around the island. The island was getting bigger, and reaching the distant production sites on foot was becoming increasingly difficult. I went to the store and chose an excellent SUV. Reliable, powerful, and, of course, fully equipped. With it, I could quickly and comfortably reach any corner of the farm, as well as transport small loads in the cargo bed. It was the perfect vehicle for any farmer. Convenient, practical, and indispensable for daily work. Sitting in our pickup, I started the engine and headed towards the power station to check on how things were going. On the way, I thought about how much work still lay ahead. Without a constant supply of wood chips, the station would quickly stop. When I arrived, I immediately noticed that the fuel bunkers were empty. The wood chips were completely gone. This meant only one thing. It was time to go back to our chipper and load a fresh batch. On the way, I decided to stop by the salt production. To my satisfaction, the process was in full swing. 3 workers had already prepared pallets of finished products. The pallets were neatly lined up, and I noted to myself that they would need to be sent to the sales point soon to make room for the new batch. After that, I went to the compost pits to make sure everything was in order. However, as soon as I got closer, I immediately realized that the hay had run out. The pits looked almost empty. Without a new batch of hay, the composting process would stop, so there was no time to waste. I parked the pickup and quickly ran to our tractor. It was time to act. First, I collected and sold all the ready compost to free up the pits for the new load. Then I returned with the trailer and loaded a fresh batch of hay into the compost pits, carefully distributing it across the sections so everything would process evenly. Once that was done, I headed to the wood chipper. I started the mechanism and gradually filled the trailer with fresh wood chips. The trailer was fully loaded, and I drove the fuel back to the power station. Arriving Arriving at the warehouses, I carefully unloaded everything, fully replenishing the supplies. Now the station could operate without interruptions, and I could finally exhale and enjoy the sense of a job well done. Then I remembered that I had forgotten to check our sawmill. When I arrived at the warehouses, I saw that the wood had already been processed, and it was time to transport the products to another production site. I drove the truck aside, got on the tractor, and headed to the sawmill. After loading all the finished products and securing them with straps, I set off for the boat production facility. Once unloaded, I realized that all that was left was to sell the pallets of salt, but I decided to postpone that for now. Instead, I focused on expanding our farm. I had long wanted to redesign the garden beds and increase their number. For this, I had to prepare new plots farther from the main farm. I removed the old beds and sold the unnecessary equipment. Then I built a road leading to the new plots. When I finished, I noticed that our money was almost gone and it had started raining outside, so I decided to go rest and continue the work tomorrow. The next morning, the weather was perfect, the ideal time to continue construction. But first, I needed to earn a bit of money, so I decided to sell all the products produced at our salt production facility. I loaded all the pallets onto the platform and headed to the sales point. In the end, we managed to earn nearly $500,000. After the transaction, I returned to the farm and put all the equipment back in its place. I thought about getting a larger platform since our farm was already producing so much that it no longer fit on the old one. So I went to the store and purchased a big trailer for transport and at the same time a new truck to tow it. All of this didn't cost too much, a little over $100,000, which was a small amount for our farm. Sitting in the new truck, I hooked up the trailer and decided to test the equipment right away. I needed to transport products from the sawmill to the boat production facility. Upon arriving at the sawmill, I carefully opened the trailer compartment and began loading the goods with the loader. Once everything was ready, I delivered the products to their destination and unloaded them without any issues. After that, I parked the truck under the canopy and returned to constructing new facilities. This time, instead of regular garden beds, I decided to build full-fledged greenhouses. In them, we could grow everything we used to, but much more efficiently. In the end, I managed to set up 6 greenhouses, and I think this number will be enough for our further development. After completing all the necessary construction work, I inspected the results with satisfaction. Now we had 6 new greenhouses, which would eventually produce a huge amount of crops, and that was very pleasing. But before they could start operating, they needed to be activated, and all that was required was water. I ran to our water tank, secured it on the truck, and headed to the new greenhouses. There was still quite a lot of water in the tank, so I emptied it into the first greenhouse. It filled a little over halfway. Since we had several greenhouses, I went back for another batch of water and continued distributing it to all of them. After some time, all the reservoirs were completely filled and the greenhouses were ready for operation. Now it was time to start production, which I did. After that, I parked the truck and decided to take a short break. The next morning, the first thing I did was check on our power station. It turned out that the wood chips had run out again. However, I didn't rush to load a new batch, since I had long planned to move the power station a bit farther from the farm. First, I went to our new greenhouses and noticed that some finished crops had already accumulated there. Wasting no time, I hurried to the truck, got behind the wheel, and headed back to the greenhouses. Of course, driving such a large truck on these narrow roads wasn't easy, but I was used to it now, and it came much easier. I loaded all the pallets of products into the container and took them to the sales point. In the end, we earned a little over $40,000, enough to almost cover the cost of building one greenhouse. Upon returning, I parked the truck under the canopy and decided to finally start moving our power station. I sold the old one and began preparing the site for the new facility, but soon realized that funds were insufficient. I had to postpone the project until until better times and focus on something else. While saving up, I decided to start gathering wood. The sawmill's warehouse stocks had already run out. By the end of the day, I managed to replenish the warehouses with nearly 30,000 litres. While the wood was being processed, I went to rest. The next morning, I noticed that our crops were already ripe. I ran to the old harvester but decided it was time to replace it. I sold the old machine and bought a new one. It cost nearly $76,000. With it, however, I was able to quickly and effortlessly harvest all the soybeans and unload them into the trailer of our tractor. Winter had begun, which meant that work on the farm had noticeably slowed down, so I decided to take a break. Several months passed, and our warehouses were filled with produced goods. It was time to sell them. Using the truck and container, I started collecting the products and managed to completely fill the container. There was so much that the truck could barely handle the load. I sold everything for more than $1 million, and although this wasn't all the products, the amount was already very satisfying. By that time, the assembly of a yacht at our production facility should also have been completed. It turned out to be quite large, and I realized that the container we had was not suitable for transporting it. I returned the container and went to the store, where I bought a large trailer and a powerful loader, capable of lifting the yacht and loading it onto the platform. When all the equipment was ready, I carefully loaded the yacht onto the platform and transported it to the sales point. We were paid a little over $1 million for it. I was amazed by this amount. I hadn't even expected the project to sell for so much. I also started improving our farm. First, I built a new sales point, a huge port where we could now bring all our products. Recently, we had been producing so many goods that the old points could no longer handle the volume. In addition, I decorated the farm a bit and built a circular road around the entire island. I installed lighting and set up a new production facility where we could now catch and sell fish. Our island had improved significantly. More production facilities were appearing, and the farm was becoming increasingly profitable. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Bye everyone!